What is FOIA? In this session, we will cover the following topics. First, we will give you an overview of public records laws. Then we will talk about how to avoid FOIA. And if you must go the FOIA route, how to best do it, what to ask for. And we will also be talking about an example walkthrough of a FOIA project, that of a story around a social media monitoring software called Social Sentinel. Freedom of information laws can be powerful tools to unlock government information. They are generally designed to bring transparency to governmental issues and allow for people to request records from government agencies. But often these laws are written with exemptions, meaning they are generally some records that are exempt and there are some that are not subject to these laws. Each law around the world is different, and to write successful records requests also involves knowing the laws, learning about the exemptions, and looking into how agencies have responded to them in the past. While every country has its own resources, there is a global right to information ranking that can help you get a better idea of what public records laws are in each country. In the US, the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, was introduced in 1967. The Freedom of Information Act has provided the public the right to request access to records from any federal agency. It is often described as the law that keeps citizens in the know about their government. Federal agencies are required to disclose any information requested under the FOIA law unless it falls under one of 9 exemptions which protect interests such as personal privacy, national security, and law enforcement. Even if public records requests can be powerful, it might make sense for you to consider the pros and the cons of using public records in your reporting. Here are some of the pros. You can gain deep insights into government, and you might even be able to obtain information that no one else has. Some of the cons are that it can take a lot of tedious maintenance, it can take a long time, it can be costly, and you may receive a lot of information that leads nowhere. For instance, Fiquen Sabendo, a journalism agency specializing in the Freedom of Information Act in Brazil, had to wait 5 years for complete records, even though the government was required to comply with the law. There are many alternatives to public records requests that you might want to explore before you rely too heavily on public records for your reporting. You could contact the government agency directly and maybe talk to a press officer for that agency. And if you do go that route, it can help to be very kind and consistent over time. You can also talk to a Freedom of Information officer to get a better understanding of what the organization may have released before, and sometimes they also publish these things on their website and elsewhere. For example, BuzzFeed asked for data from a government agency called the Equal Employment and Opportunity Commission, an agency where people can file complaints about workplace discrimination. After a lot of friendly back and forth, the reporter was able to receive anonymized records from the agency's data department without having to file a public records request. As another alternative to public records requests, you could look into whether other people, be it academics, lawyers, and other researchers, have already done the same research you want to do. You can search for records on muckrock.com or asktheeu.org or other sites, which requests they have filed and what documents they have received back from those requests. You can also ask academics who study your subject what documents they have been able to obtain. Many might have that data and documents that you want, but they might not have published them on their websites. This picture shows the Atlas of Surveillance from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which compiles a lot of different information about the uses of technology by police. And last but not least, you can look for projects from other organizations on GitHub, where a lot of developers might publish their raw data. But if you really want to file records requests, here are some useful things to think about. What to ask for. It's really important to think about that. Commonly requested documents include complaints, misconduct files, disciplinary records, but also agendas, calendars, and other planning documents, as well as internal investigations, inspection reports, and misconduct files. AI-related requests could include training manuals for data scientists, caseworker handbooks for people learning a new technology, training data documentation like dictionaries, contracts, sales pitch presentations from vendors and tech companies, communications like emails, text messages, and DMs between government entities and company representatives as well. Of course, you can also request data that is produced by government agencies as they use technology. Some things you could consider asking for are databases and spreadsheets. Those can be based on applications and forms filled out by folks, including, for example, asylum applications. You could also ask for databases used by departments for bureaucratic reasons, court cases, criminal databases, things like that. You can also ask for databases that are used by departments in secret. That could include police gang databases, risk assessments, no-fly lists, databases like these that the general public don't know about. Then there are non-data things you can turn into data. You could ask for communications databases. That could include Outlook export files or Twitter DMs. Please note that in some countries, data only falls under FOIA if it's inside a document, meaning it's inside a report or a spreadsheet. Now that we have had an approximate idea of what to ask for, it might be important for you to think about how to ask. How you phrase your requests can have a big impact on whether you get records and what records you might receive. FOIA and other public records requests actually take a lot of upfront research if you want to be effective and cut out the time it takes folks to get the data and information back to you. It's worthwhile finding out the following. Who owns the data? Such as, is the agency you're asking actually in charge of the data? Are multiple agencies in charge of the data? And if so, could you request the information and the data from all parties? What does the information and the data look like? So maybe you can think about what columns should the data have? And what does the data mean? Ask for a data layout. Last but not least, very importantly, know the law. One example for data that could be useful to think about is data produced when people fill out government forms. Let's discuss an example of immigration records from the US. In this case, we can answer some of the questions the following way. Who owns the data? And here, it would be USCIS, the United States Center for Immigration Services. What does the data look like? You can look into what the asylum application looks like to get a better feeling for what the data looks like. And what does the data mean? You can ask for a data layout to figure out what that looks like. Here you can see a description of how people may receive asylum in the US. It requires applicants to fill out this particular form. In this case, every year people come to the United States seeking protection because they have suffered persecution or fear that they will suffer persecution due to their race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, and political opinion. That is the basis of asylum. To be able to receive asylum seekers have to fill out this form. This form can serve then as a way for you to ask for the data. In this case, the reporters at BuzzFeed News went through application forms to better understand what data the government might have on asylum applications. They then asked for a copy of the database created based on this form. The application form also helped the reporters understand the columns that the database might include. For instance, the data will likely contain the city for the U.S. residence of the applicant, the state for the U.S. residence of the applicant, and the zip code for the U.S. residence of the applicant, based on this form, as we can see here. While this is a lot to write into a request, these columns can help you figure out what the data may contain. And when you have conversations with the public information officer or the freedom of information officer, you can then negotiate what columns you would absolutely want and which ones you can live without. As with any public records requests for data, it's also important that you ask for a data dictionary and a record layout. This is important because there may be acronyms and shorthands that make sense to bureaucrats, but not to you. And here are some key things to think about after you filed. The work does not stop once you have filed a records request. To get your public records, consider the following steps. Keep track of your requests. You can use a tracker spreadsheet, for example. You want to nudge people and make sure you do it again and again. You want to get to know your FOI or Freedom of Information Officer and be kind and ready to explain what you need from them. And if all fails, you might have to sue. if you absolutely have to. In these slides, we will now discuss how two reporters at BuzzFeed News were using public records requests to investigate a company that used AI to flag threats on social media. For an article titled, "Your Dumb Tweets Are Getting Flagged to People Trying to Stop School Shootings," Peter Aldous and Lam Thuy Vo filed more than 40 public records requests with schools that used the software to better understand what kind of information it was flagging and what wording it may be using. Here's how the reporters determined how to send public records requests. First, they found public data on who had purchased the software. Then they went through the website of each school and school district to find a person who might be in charge of records requests. Then they filed Freedom of Information requests and followed up with each one on a weekly basis. The reporters found out that the software company, Social Sentinel, would send the schools that were subscribed to the company's service email alerts every time the software detected alleged threats in each school district. The reporters then decided to request all alerts sent by Social Sentinel to school safety officials as an .msg and .eml file, exported from the school's email client. The reporters also attached examples obtained through a public records request from another Social Sentinel client. They asked officers to provide the information for download or on CD-ROM or other digital storage medium. The reporters, last but not least, also asked for contracts and memorandums and agreements entered into between the school district and Social Sentinel. The email format was much more helpful to the reporters than the PDFs. The reporters were able to look at the code of these emails to find hidden links that you could click on to further inspect each email alert. The email alerts would link to the kind of social media posts that the Social Sentinel company deemed dangerous. Using the hidden links, the reporters were able to extract the text to every social media post that was flagged as a threat. And here is a cross-section of them. The reporters then amassed more information around the accounts that were flagged by the software. With this information, the reporters reached out to every person who was flagged by the algorithm of the social media company, Social Sentinel. And in the final story, the reporters were able to do two things. They were able to get in touch with and write about people who were deemed dangerous by Social Sentinel. And one of the people who was flagged as a threat was a 13-year-old girl whose tweet was considered dangerous because she used the word kill in it. The tweet was about the characters in her favorite TV show, New Girl, and the tweet said, "Nick, if you don't fall in love with Jess again, I'm going to kill you," she wrote. Through more reporting, the data reporter Peter Aldous was also able to reverse engineer some of the decision-making from the software. He found that the posts were flagged by Social Sentinel and that those posts were much more likely to contain words like kill, school, murder, and shooting than posts from the same users that didn't trigger an alert. In other words, the software was likely to look for keywords such as kill and murder, but was catching a lot of false alerts because of how often these kinds of words were used in slang. If you need more information, you can find some in our resources. Thank you so much.